Okay. Seems like I'm getting a lot of guest requests right now. Maybe people are accidentally sending guest requests. A lot of guest requests where people aren't there. So do just give it a second, everybody. Yo, what's up? How old are you?
I'm 32.
Do you support Donald Trump?
I do.
What's your birth year?
1992.
For sure. If you could go back in time and you could either vote for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, who would you vote for?
I'd choose Donald Trump 1,000 times.
Okay. And why would you do that?
I think in terms of policy, just in general, he has better platform. I think the
What
Democrat
makes you think that?
platform too much is just whatever Donald Trump does, do the opposite. I think Trump actually has a plan. I don't think he's perfect by any means, but I think he's done a great job. Like I said, he's not perfect. He could always improve, but I think he's got the policy side of things.
What's his healthcare plan?
Don't know, don't care. Well, let me explain what I believe on healthcare.
Concepts of a plan?
Healthcare. What?
He has concepts of a plan, I tell you. Concepts. He's been
Yeah,
having
I know.
that since 10 years ago. Concepts of a plan.
Yeah, I know. He said that. Here's my stance on healthcare, is that the government shouldn't be involved at all, because what we see when markets are too heavily influenced by government policies, that's when they become more socialized. That's when they become lower quality and more expensive, and that's really the biggest issue with healthcare. Now, I'm not going to say I'm super
Repeat, what was the biggest
passionate
issue
about the
with
topic of
healthcare?
healthcare. What was that?
Sorry, restate that. What was the biggest issue with healthcare?
That we have too much government involvement. And that goes with a lot of different
No, we don't have enough
industries.
government involvement. Countries around the world that have more government involvement actually have half as much of the per capita per individual costs comparative to us in terms of healthcare expenditure, and they actually have better average health outcomes as well.
It's kind of a apples and oranges comparison, because in the U.S., for example, if you have breast cancer, you're much more likely to survive than if you were to be treated in Europe or in Canada. So there are goods and bads of each, but the European healthcare plans that we
What
see.
was your citation for that?
Sorry, for which one?
The for breast cancer?
I'm not sitting in front of a computer like you. It is pretty common. I think it's a pretty significant increase in likelihood to survive breast cancer if you were treated within the United States. I think pretty much any cancer, honestly, is also within that. You're much more likely to survive. So we don't have a perfect system. Again, I'm
But
not.
that wouldn't be due to private funding of cancer research though. And also Trump is gutting cancer research. You know that he's cutting it?
That's one of those things where, again, I don't think government dollars should be involved. And I know that's controversial to say, oh, well, it's cancer research. We need to have government involved. But pharmaceutical companies are doing a lot of this research, somewhat subsidized by the government, but they also are multi-billion-dollar industries where can they not research these things by themselves? Where the government should be involved is if they do find these cures for cancer, say, for example, let's try and minimize how much they can profit off of it and say, hey, if it's life-saving care, let's make it so that you don't have a 50-year or a 100-year copyright on this technology that has to be shared because it's life-saving technology. But again, we're going down a rabbit hole where I said I'm not that super interested
So
in
it's
the
not just
healthcare side of things.
so it's not just patents, but you understand that like you're not acknowledging Trump cutting research, right? You understand that Trump is cutting cancer research, and that is going to
I
limit
acknowledge
our
that,
ability
sure.
to be able to address any type of meaningful like treatment for cancer.
I acknowledge that, yes, because again, like I said, I don't think the government should be involved in this, because when you get government involved, efficiency goes down significantly. I'm not super passionate about this whole discussion on healthcare. I would
I
love to discuss
can I get
the
that
other
thing
things.
where you got the breast cancer is more likely to be survived in the United States comparative to other countries?
I can go in front of a computer if you'd like, but like I said, this is not the topic I really care to discuss, because healthcare is just one of the many issues that people have in this country. I think Trump's biggest platform does not revolve around healthcare. It revolves largely around immigration and around the economy.
Sorry, restate that one more time. You said it's relating to the economy. Well, Trump's like economic views are dog shit. So,
I mean, that's your opinion,
cancer
but
survival rates are
statistically,
higher in Germany than they are here in the United States.
Okay, where's your source on that?
That's just from World Population Review.
Because from what I know about healthcare is that in pretty much any cancer treatment, especially in breast cancer treatment, you're much more likely to survive in the U.S. And if you were to say have a hip replacement, you're much more
Well,
likely
in
to
Germany, it's
have a
around
successful hip
0.5%,
replacement.
0.4% higher in terms of cancer survival rate.
So you're saying that a mostly government-run healthcare system and a partially government-run system are pretty comparable.
I'm saying that, yeah, in terms of just that. But like, if we want to look at other types of conditions that people deal with, right, it's definitely worse off in terms of like our system. This is the one cherry-picked example that people can give that where the U.S. looks slightly better, right? And
I
that's
wouldn't
it.
say
That's
it's
it. And
I
it's
think
because
you're
of publicly
forcing
funded
the
research too.
government narrative. Again, I would rather we discuss something like the economy or immigration because in your last long discussion that I painstakingly waded through the entire thing of you almost exclusively provided complete falsities and
Tell me
I
what's
mean
false
made
about
up
the economic views that I talked about.
uh, trying to state that his economic plan is hurting industries, that we're losing money, that his big beautiful bill is costing us trillions of dollars. Like all of that is largely false.
Nope, that's totally true. I mean, the big beautiful bill is adding $3.4 trillion to the debt from the that's from the committee for or not from the committee for supplemental federal budget. That's from the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan committee from the federal government. So that's what they
So,
indicated. Everything I said about the bill was indicated by the Congressional Budget Office. So where are you getting your source from?
so the CBO is not nonpartisan because
Yeah, it
if we
is.
compare no, it's not. If we compare like to like bills when they're passed on a Republican versus a Democrat, the times that they're passed on a Democrat, they do not take into consideration the potential loss in tax revenue, whereas they'll do that with the Republican side of things. So what economists have actually
What
come out
potential loss? Because they have higher taxes. What they wouldn't have a potential loss on that.
but in this case, there's lower taxes, and you're also assuming that every Democrat passed bill is higher taxes. It's not the case. But the
Well,
CBO is
I'm saying higher taxes comparative to Republican administration policy, and that would be specifically for higher incomes. So in
well
terms of tax revenue,
the big beautiful bill is a continuation of the tax cuts that were pushed by the Trump administration in the
and
first
also
term.
what you said about the CBO is not true. Like they take into account but that for either or if they have policies that would affect that. So the Congressional Budget Office has people from both sides of the aisle.
And so then we also on top of that need to consider what are the potential benefits, right? Because we're also cutting costs in regards to how much people are going to be people who shouldn't be on things like SNAP and other social programs. How much money are we saving in the tax dollars in that regard?
Not much, right? And you're cutting 420,000 children off of free school lunch and breakfast on average every month, 2.5 million people off their off food stamps on average per month, and over 10 million people off their health insurance in the context of Medicaid, through the context of the big beautiful bill. That's literally what you're doing in terms of cutting, and
Yes, but you're
that doesn't even reduce the debt. The debt still is 3.4 trillion over the next 10 years.
but you're also assuming that those people should be on it, and the estimations for the big beautiful bill by the end of the big beautiful bill is that will net us $10 trillion as well. So that's
No,
another thing
that's not
that
true. That's not true. That's taking into account any revenues brought in by the bill. And specifically, yes, I am assuming that 420,000 children should not be cut off of free school lunch and breakfast. You're saying children shouldn't be fed?
I'm
Is that your
saying the
argument?
government.
Is that your position? Is that I'm making the assumption that children should be fed?
My stance is that the government shouldn't be involved because
In feeding
this is coming
children?
out.
The government not should not be involved in feeding children, hungry children, at school.
I think charities and churches should be responsible for helping
While
out the
they're
needy
at
because
school, so they should go hungry while they're at school?
you realize that historically churches or schools have always been church run. It hasn't been state run schools. The whole
Schools have
idea of
always been church run. Wow. No.
Yes, go back into the 1800s and
I'm sorry,
before. They
I don't
were
want to go back to the 1800s for educational standards. I'm sorry, what is your position here? You want to go back to the 1800s for educational standards? Just because
yes,
the
back in
church
the
wasn't. Wait,
1800s,
the church also
individuals
used to
were
determine
highly.
what fucking king we had. That's not the policies I think we should exist today. I don't
We
think we should
didn't
have a
have a
king.
king.
I don't believe
We
in
didn't have a
kings.
king in the United
I don't
States in the
believe that. I
1800s.
don't believe in church running the state. I think that's an absurd ideal that has led to vast levels of terror amongst our society. To be totally frank with you, I believe in separation of church and state. I believe in secular society, and you can be Christian and also believe in that as well.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm not a Christian, and I still think the Christian schools were much more efficient than what we have now. So
Then go to a
1800.
Christian private school. You don't have to make it public. We have separation of church and state. If you want there to be Christian run schools, then there should be run schools across every other religious ideological spectrum, which would obviously be absurd. Secular schools are the only way to meaningfully actually run them.
What do
If
you
you want
think
to
this?
teach all the different religions within the context of the schools, have a religious studies course. I actually think that's great.
What
But
do you
like, don't
think
just do one
separation of church
religion.
and state means?
What?
What do you think separation of church and state means?
Well, I think it means a lot of things. I think it means religious reasons are not going to be reasons to make the law a particular way. It's going to mean that the law shouldn't be influenced based upon someone's religion, that the church shouldn't be determining who's in the context of positions of power, right? Those would all be things that I would bring up. It's all derivative of the single idea that religious reasons are not a reason for the government to operate a certain way.
You're largely correct, but the point of separation of church and state isn't that you shouldn't have a school that is largely religious, because the school is not supposed to be part of the state. The state was never supposed to be involved in education. It's supposed to be, like you mentioned earlier, that we're not supposed to have a specific requirement that an individual be part of, say, the Protestant church or the Catholic church in order to be able to hold a position of power. So that's what the meaning of separation of church and state means. So when we're saying that we want church-run schools, that has nothing to do with separation of church and state, because schools is not a government institution.
Schools are a governmental institution.
They are
They're
now.
funded by the government. They're public
They
schools.
are now.
We're talking about public schools that are governmental institutions.
They are now. That's my whole point. Is
So yeah,
historically they have.
okay. So if they are now, then there shouldn't be any type of religious influence, because that would be undermining our separation of church and state. Because then it would be
Nor
a
should
governmental
there be
institution and a
any.
religious institution together.
There shouldn't be any government influence either.
What?
My point again.
So you think
Government
we
should
should
not be
get rid of
involved
K
in
through
it.
12 education?
No, I'm saying the government shouldn't be involved in K through 12 education.
Okay, I meant free public K through 12 education. You want to get rid of that?
It's not free. I pay
He
$1,900.
wants our society to be less educated.
No, I don't want to. Okay, I'm a single man. I live in a house and I pay my property taxes every year. I pay $1,900 towards the school district for education. I don't have any kids. I'm not paying for my
You
children
were a
to go to
kid.
school.
You were a kid.
I know, and other people's
Did you go to public
taxes
school?
paid for it. Yes, and other people's taxes paid for that, so it wasn't free.
Oh! So
think you have it on
if
here,
people did
that's
it for
not
you, then
free.
you should do it for other people. Woo!
But I would rather have not gone to public school, because I think
Really?
public education is terrible.
You would have
So
rather
let me-
not had an education.
No, I think that I would have had a better education if it wasn't public. So, for
You
example,
think it would have been better? Okay, so maybe for
I've been
some,
trying to provide this
maybe
example
for
for
maybe
5
for
minutes.
wait,
Will you
let
do
me tell you, maybe for a small portion of kids that where their parents would be able to afford the extremely expensive education, but for everyone in general, right, we would have worse off educational standards.
That's untrue. Historically, that's untrue. In the 1800s, people were learning Latin in 4th grade. That people now are.
You think that we
not
had better educational standards in the 1800s comparative to now?
Yes, I do. You think laughing at that is somehow dismantling
No,
my
dude,
argument?
obviously, dude, I'm sorry. If you think that we have a similar level of education for the average American right now as we did 200 years ago, I'm sorry, but you have no clue about history at all. You have
Oh,
no clue
I
about
absolutely
history.
do.
That is
You want to?
no.
You want
You
to
have
look
no
up
basis. You have no based on what metric? Based on
every
what
single
metric?
metric. If we're talking
Name
about
one.
history, or if we're talking about people who
I'm
are.
asking you, name one.
I just said one. History, mathematics. If
That's
we're
not a
talking
that's
about
not a metric. I'm asking for a specific metric that I could apply. What specific metric in terms of educational outcomes existed back then that would tell you we had better educational outcomes in the 1800s
literacy
for the
rates,
average American comparative to what we have today?
literacy rates.
You think literacy rates were better then?
Yes,
What were
look at some
literacy
of the
rates?
schools in, say,
Okay,
like
let's look.
Chicago,
U.S.
where they had
literacy rates in 1800s. There's no way he just said that. All right, let's take a look. And by the way, education is not just literacy rates, by the way.
I know I gave you seven other examples, and you ignore all of them.
Well, I didn't. You didn't know.
Yes, I did. I said math,
No, I didn't.
history,
That's not a specific educational outcome.
math literacy is. It's how the Department of Education
Oh wait,
gauges
math.
whether
Wait,
or not
what? Wait, how do you compare math literacy? Do you have a study that or a source that indicates that? And by the way, I'm
the
looking this
Department of
up. I
Education has
gotta.
a standard.
What were the rates of educational? Or I mean, what's it called? Literacy back then.
I'm not. I don't. Again, you're the one who's in front of a computer,
Um. Well, you don't have
and
it. Then how could you make the comparison? How could you say?
because I've done the research on these things. I'm
Okay, well
speaking
then
off
you should
of
be able to tell
knowledge.
me, right?
I do not have a photographic memory. So the problem is that anytime I make a claim, you try and say, "Oh, what's your source?" But if you make a claim, you don't have to substantiate your own source. That's the problem here. And I'll say one thing that's beneficial
Wait, I'm
for
sorry. I'm
this.
sorry. I don't think I need to have a source right off the top of my head to specifically say that we have better literacy now, given the change in educational standards. Right? That's very obvious, and I can provide you a source of that. I thought that was painfully obvious. You're the one that's making an unconventional claim.
Yeah, that's because we expect that conventional knowledge at this point is true. When sometimes what we're taught in school is just not true. I mean, we're taught that Columbus called Native Americans Indians because he thought he arrived in India. That's not true.
Indigenous Americans. And by the way, Matt wants to join as
So
well.
that's just absolutely not true because India as a country didn't exist back then, right?
Yeah. Wait.
In It's just one of these things
Oh wait,
where we're
don't do this. Don't do this historical revisionism. So it is
why because it
absolutely
disproves your argument.
no. It was a claim that he specific. No, at that time that was true. Like he did claim that he thought he was in the Indies, right?
No, the reason why he called them Indians is because it's based off the word Indios, and it essentially means people in God.
Can you give me a single a piece of evidence for that?
His biography, his diaries, or whatever.
Then give me a
This is
single historian that says that.
all right. Let me pull up my computer.
Yeah,
I can just kind of shut this down right now. I
go
mean,
ahead.
he did call them Indios, but that's because that's Spanish for Indian. So Indios literally just meant Spanish for Indian. So yes, he called them. It didn't have nothing to do with God. I mean, so I don't know what point he's trying to make by this. Like like in his memoirs, he does actually say Indios, and he's getting God because of the word Dios there, but you can't use that as a connection just because the word sounds like the word for God in Spanish.
It's
So
not. It's not based off of what it sounds like in Spanish or what the Spanish meaning means. It's based off of what Columbus himself said. But again, this is a complete diversion.
Wait,
You
here,
guys
hold
really
on.
like to get down
I wanted to ask Matt
the
because
point.
I'm trying to find literacy rates and it doesn't seem like it's coming up right off the bat. So
we didn't have no. So we didn't have standardized measurements of literacy in the 1800s. That's a new invention, and so we have to go by what was just reported at the time. You have to remember that in the early 1800s, about 50 to 60% of people at the time probably were literate, but they were only white people. Okay, so that's very important. White men were literate. Women were not, and especially individuals who were not white, they were not literate, right? That improved up until the 1870s. Well, even still, it was mainly white men. And then that got better out of control once you go farther and farther up. So his point is that if literacy rates were actually better, he's only applying it to white northern men who had the money to actually afford those educations.
So
And
so
what
there's
are U.S. literacy rates today?
very
Now it's like 98%, 97%. It depends on where
Okay,
you
well,
go. Some states are
it
lower.
says based upon what I'm reading right now that it was of specifically just white adults that it was 80% in 1850. That's what this one source claims from like someone's Substack, and I can't find any other source of like anything
Yeah,
else.
because we had no way of actually measuring it. What we're actually
So I'm
doing
like,
is we're
how's he
going
making that
back and
claim?
we're looking at who went to school, and what they were learning, and we're extrapolating from that. But one thing we do know is that for most of the 1800s, the only people who were actually being well educated and thus literate were wealthy white northern men.
And also, here's another thing: is that he thinks that there were better educational standards in the 1800s comparative to now. Matt, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think that's like obviously like false. I mean, he said, well, they
am
were
I
teaching
allowed
them Latin.
to?
Not everybody was learning Latin, right? Again, only wealthy northern white men who had an interest in learning that kind of Latin in a religious school. By the way, they were the ones who may be learning Latin, right? But most people were not actually learning Latin.
Am I
So
allowed to speak here?
yeah, okay, go ahead.
Because you understand my point. I think you do understand the point in that we had standards back then. You can say, okay, yeah, we had rich white people who were the ones that were experiencing it. Yeah, we live in a different country at that point. That's not something that I condone in that regard. But the fact is that the standards that schools were held to, that operating schools is a higher standard to schools that we have now. So whether or not you're saying it was more accessible to white people or not, it doesn't matter. I'm talking about the
What?
standard.
Well, I'm sorry. You can't just act like it is the case that you don't take into account the standards applicable to anyone else other than literally white men. I'm sorry. You can't just only look at what's
Hold
affecting
on.
white
Nope.
men.
You're
That is
you're
a
straw manning
ridiculous
my
standard.
argument.
That is a ridiculous
You're
standard just to
straw manning
ignore
my
everyone
argument.
else.
No, I'm talking about the school. The school itself. The schools. What were their standards then versus are their standards now?
Yes, and we're clearly telling you that the standards now are significantly better than that 200 years ago. I'm
No,
sorry.
they were
The
not.
fact that you think it's even comparable is crazy to me.
The fact that you just keep on saying it's crazy and then having that facial
I'm sorry.
expression
We have
disprove my argument.
supercomputers. We have supercomputers in our pockets. We literally have access to the internet. We have
Do you think
socialized communication to an extent unfathomable to people that were existing
so?
in the 1800s.
So your claim is that access to more information makes us smarter and have higher standards.
Absolutely, technology has
Then
made
why
us
is the net
smarter.
IQ going down right now?
So when you say IQ is, I don't think IQ is the best measure. One, two, as it relates to this, you understand that it's how much we have the ability to actualize within our reality that would be related to the level of intelligence that I'm prescribing. Is that it makes us smarter as people to have access to significantly more knowledge and information. If you have
You
And
more,
by
would
the
think
way,
like, if you have more access to information, you are going to be a smarter person because of your access to information.
and by
I
the
would
way,
say
you can
before
talk
the
to.
age of the internet, that would be true. But the fact is, because we have access to so much information readily available at our pocket, we don't feel the need to learn and memorize these things internally. And that's why I think people, long before what we have now, who still maybe had a lot of access to information, not as much as we had, they had to actually learn these things. There was an expectation to know things and not to rely on a device in your pocket.
Well, hold on. So we actually have a term for this. It's called informational overload, and it's a real thing, right? I deal with it every day when I'm teaching, right? It's called informational overload. We're trying to, but the reason how you get by that is you have effective teachers that have the funding to be able to help students sort out the information. One thing that you're completely missing is that since the 1980s, we have systematically been on a mission to defund schooling so that teachers and resources are not there to help students actually be able to parse all that information. You can go back and see a direct correlation between whenever we started to cut school funding in both the state and federal level and that rate of both literacy and the information processing going down. And so what you're actually saying is that I agree with you. We have had a much difficult time, but that's because of people in the government who are cutting funding, not because students are becoming dumber or because they can't like process any information. It's because they lack the actual resources needed to be able to process that information.
The total amount of money that's been allocated to education over the last 40 years increased substantially in terms of billions of dollars, and yet literacy rates and the like math standards, those have decreased over time.
That's simply
And
not
what we've
true.
seen is
You
that
can
it's an
go
increase
to
in spending
That's
towards
not true. No, I'm
administrators.
sorry, that's not true.
It
You
is
can go
true.
and look at the only administrations that ever give funding for education are, by the way, almost always Democrats. The ones who take away the funding, almost always Republicans. And on the state level, where most of the funding comes from anyway, most of the funding comes at the state level. That in red states has been systematically defunded over decades. And in blue states, the ones that have the most funding are the ones that are the most well educated and have the best outcome. Right now, the state that has the best educated student populace is actually Massachusetts, where they have a robust, well-funded school system. There is a direct correlation between the amount that you fund the school and the amount that the students have uh, within their outcomes. It's a
No.
direct correlation.
Okay. Let me address that in two ways. One is to give you the dumb argument, which is correlation does not equal causation, as Parker stated earlier. But the thing is, I can find you the exact same type of argument in the negative of that, where we have different communities where the per pupil spending exceeds anywhere else in the entire state, and they have the lowest literacy rates in the state. So there is not a direct
Such as where?
What?
Where? Please give me
What?
one state where they have a lower level of funding, and yet the outcomes are actually better.
I would probably wager a guess that in places like Detroit, Michigan, and Chicago, Illinois, and the surrounding areas, those ones that have high spending per pupil and have lower literacy rates than the average American.
So, what you're saying is that on the local level, they need more resources. If you talk to anybody in Chicago, because I used to live in Illinois, anybody that lives in Chicago, they have a resource problem in Chicago, right? That they can't hire enough teachers. They don't have enough places to do it. And one of the reasons why is because the federal government has pulled back on their active funding in Chicago, and the state cannot keep up. We should build our model like on the states that actually have a well-rounded system like Massachusetts, where they actually have well-funded systems and they actually invest in every single school, not in only some schools. Chicago is a unique example.
Matt, I think we can have some common ground here in that the problem isn't necessarily funding, but how the funding gets allocated. Because I think, again, the reason why I'm opposed to government involvement is because there's always some form of corruption that can enter the conversation, right? And so that's why we see these huge increases of spending, but it ends up that it largely becomes administrative fees, right? You have administrators who are taking a lot of the money. So the places in which we're seeing these increases in performance with the increase in spending, those ones are probably the ones with less corruption and less administrator fees, where it's actually getting to the educators. And I think that's great. Again, I would still prefer that we don't have government involved, because I think we can circumvent this whole problem if we try and minimize the influence of government in this regard.
But you do understand, right? I heard you like a while back. You're talking about schools that are religious, schools that are private, schools that are charter schools, maybe, right? You're talking about all those things. But don't you realize that for people to be able to afford those things, the government has to pay those people? All you're doing is shifting the money from one location to another. You're paying people to then pay private entities with our tax money, pay those private entities, and those private entities cannot follow and don't have to follow the strict government standards that we say that you must follow. That's why we as Democrats are opposed to them, because they could be teaching anything, and yet my taxpayer money is going to that and actually paying people as a form of welfare and saying, you can't afford it, here's some a nice government money, go and pay tens of thousands of dollars to any school that you want to go to, where now I have no input into that school, because at least with my money, I have input into what actually goes into my local school.
Matt, so your claim is essentially that the public schools have a higher standard because they are public, they're under a government standard, than private schools. Is that your stance?
No, I never said that. I said they have more input and they can have more standards. But at the current moment, they do not, primarily because we have spent decades trying to roll back those standards and bringing them back to the state level. And then when they're at the state level, unless you're in blue states, right? Many states will actually try to claw it back and actually send money through vouchers and whatnot to actually send people outside of those political systems. This is a multi-level way of trying to cripple the way that we have a common public school within our whole country.
So you just agreed
That's my
with me
stance.
that we're lowering the standards. You just agreed with me that we're lowering the standards now.
Yes, some administrations lower the standards. Yes.
It's not an administration thing. This is a Department of Education thing, and it's also on a state level. So
That's an administration thing.
the whole premise of what you just said, you stated that public schools have a higher rigor standard, and we don't know what these public schools are going to be teaching. But when we look at their literacy rates, public schools have a higher rate. They have a higher outcome. They have higher likelihood of people getting admitted into upper education than public schools. So they clearly have higher standards. Just because it's not run by the government doesn't mean it's not efficient. In fact, that's a negative correlation.
I never claimed that it wasn't. That wasn't my claim. My claim was that it
You're
costs
disagreeing
too
with me.
much. No. I'm saying that it costs too much and that we have to shift resources that I'm paying for in order to prop up these private entities. And I'm saying that money could better be spent propping up the public schools, which I'm paying for already. If we wanted to take the money that people on the right want to give to like vouchers and things like that and actually gave it to the public schools and actually made sure they were well funded, well rounded, and had everything that they needed, then there would be no disparity. But that does not exist right now.
So would you be in favor of those vouchers in the sense saying we are going to let parents choose to use the money that's funded from the taxpayers like me to go put their child into public school or into a private school? It's the same amount of money, but the parents get to choose which one they put their child.
I am not in favor of vouchers or anything like that, except in very, very limited circumstances. There are only a few cases I can think of where that may work, but in general, my policy is take the money that you would give to vouchers and invest it back into the public school system and make those better. Because then I would have say in those schools, and that I can, and they are accountable to my government and to me, whereas a private school is not accountable to anyone except the people who run them. That's why I say, for example, I'm not supporting any vouchers except in very limited circumstances.
Okay, so you want to be able to hold schools to your standard.
All schools, all public schools in their local districts are subject to the people that live there.
So
Okay,
why can we
through
not
their
hold them
property
to-
taxes, you can go to any school board meeting you want to, and you can voice your opinion. Sometimes I think that it gets out of hand, but you can voice your opinion. You can run for school board. You can invest in the education of other children because you have a direct say because of the fact that you pay to direct to that school. That is not the same with a private school. It is not the same. That's one of the reasons why they are directly responsible to people like me because I pay them.
Okay, so let's say the school board consists of 3 people like you and 1 person like me. So your standards win over in terms of what is being taught and the standards that are held at a public school. Why is it that I don't get to have my standards represented by being able to choose a private school instead?
You can. You
Why-
can still
why-
choose to go to a private school.
But goes back to the whole idea of a voucher, right? Because I'm paying for public school whether or not I have children in the system or not. But if I do have a child, I want to be able to choose where my money goes.
What you're not understanding,
And I want to-
though,
and I
is
want
that
to have
you're
my-
is
let me
that
finish. Let me finish. I want to be able to have my child educated at a standard of my choosing, which
Then
in
you'll pay
terms
a little
of
bit more, and that's
yeah.
your
Then
choice.
you pay.
in
You
terms-
pay.
Yeah, that's the whole point. I pay because the government's standards are not worth my tax dollars.
No. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is, if
You don't
want to
agree with the
take your
government
child-
standards, yeah. Then you can do
Yeah,
because
homeschooling.
of
Then you can
private
do.
schools-
Then you can do private school. That's your choice. You do make those
Because a
choices.
private school
But it is
standard is
going to be
higher than
more
public.
expensive. That is the reality.
Yeah, it's going to be more expensive. And my position is that if it's going to be more expensive, and you want to make that personal choice, don't expect me to pay for it. That's what you're asking. You're expecting me to pay for it through a voucher.
No.
I'm not going to be paying for you to make that personal choice to then go to a private school. If you want to work with me to invest
Or I
back
have
in
to
the
pay
public
for your
school,
choice to go to a public school.
no, you can take it out. No, just take your
No,
kids
I
out, right?
can't.
It's all that personal
It
choice,
is
right?
taken out of my I pay again $1,900 per year towards my school district.
Tough shit.
I don't get a choice.
Tough
I
shit. I
don't
don't think
get
it should. I don't think it should be funded through
You do get a
property
choice.
taxes. I think it should be federally determined. But so I don't think it should be through property taxes. But like the point that still stands, like yeah, you're gonna have to pay for public systems still either way. That's how it works. Like for example,
But
Yeah.
you can
again,
get your
school shouldn't be a public system. It
like
shouldn't be
for like for example if
separation of
you
church and state, right?
oh wait
Your version. What is the difference at that point from saying a school and the government are like? How do you connect that those are the same institution? The only reason why is because it currently is, but not because it historically has been. Because it historically has not been a government institution. It now is, and now we don't.
Actually, you're wrong on that too, by the way. There's the common school movement that happened in the 1800s. One of the reasons why we have the public school system that we have now is because people in the 1800s didn't like the system, and so they formed a movement called the common school, where they actually pushed for more government involvement. Like,
The
once
reason
again,
for
I'm sorry, go back and read the literature on the 1800s. There were people, primarily women, by the way, who saw that it was not equitable and it was not equal, and that they needed better standards. And so what they did was they said, government, you have the power to step in here and actually make it sure that everybody, through the common good, has a well-rounded and well-funded school system, and thus a good education. And
that's
that's how
untrue.
we get the modern public. Yes, that is true.
No,
That's
the reason that there was a push for public education was because they were trying to minimize the religious reach that, again, most schools being operated largely Catholic in the entire country. They wanted to minimize that. They wanted to get people to be subservient to the state, and so they had a push for state-run education. That's a fact.
I am not doubting that there are some anti-Catholic bias throughout there, because it was one thing during the 1800s also, there was a strong anti-Catholic bias. I'm not denying that, but you cannot deny that there was a strong common school movement run by both men and women who wanted to improve the school system because they saw a unequal and overall bad standard for um, a schooling that those kids needed. That's one of the reasons
Yeah.
why we moved
Two
away
things
from
can be
that. It's
true.
not just what.
Yeah, I agree. Two things can be true.
Okay. Yes. So you brought it up. Like, I wasn't disagreeing with you, but I'm saying that the anti-Catholic bias was not actually part of that direct thing. It was part of a common school system to actually improve the system, because they saw how bad it was, and how, as I already mentioned, that the people who were getting educated were the northern white men. It wasn't people in the South. It wasn't women, and it wasn't minorities. That's one reason why we have a public school system. It's because everybody can get educated on the same equal level.
Well, that's also untrue because this is well before the civil rights movement. That push in the 1800s was not for equal representation of all Americans.
It absolutely
black,
was.
white,
There were
male, and
people in the
female.
South who were pushing for
There
the
were some.
integration. They were minorities,
But
right?
it's
Like
not the
in terms of
primary.
voices,
That
but
was
they
not the primary
absolutely were
motivation.
pushing for it
This
because
was
they
that
saw
was
the
far from the
inequities,
primary
and that
motivation.
just grew over time.
No, you're stating as if it was the primary motivation. You're stating a
The
couple
inequities
people
were.
wanted it. What?
The inequities were. It may not have been about certain racial inequities, but they saw inequities in both poor white children too, and they said we can't have that, right? And then from the poor white children, then it went to women, and then from women, it went to individuals who are minorities, because progress never stops.
Do you know how much people were paying for most of these Christian-based, these church-based educations?
I have no idea.
Almost nothing, generally nothing. These were often offered for free, and so you're still trying to push that it was only a rich person. It was only accessible to rich people, and that it was a standard that was lower than what we have now. Everything you're saying is unsubstantiated.
No. The last thing I'll say on that, and then I'll let Parker have it over. The last thing I'll say on that is that the reason why it was only northern white men is because even the church back in the day was segregated, and they didn't want anybody who was not wealthy white people in their pews to learn. That they were not going to invite in people who are minorities. They were not going to invite in women to learn, especially because their scripture kind of says that. And so they're not going to invite people in to make them learn. That's why. So it may have been free, but they were choosing only wealthy white people to invite into their pews.
And no one's condoning that. My whole point is that
You're saying that it was better.
no, I'm saying the standards of education were better. I didn't say the methodology.
I'm gonna go on to the next person.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, thank you to Peter for the $50. I really appreciate that, Peter. That's very kind of you. And I'm sorry, everybody. I know there must be new people in the chat because there's a lot of people who don't understand or might not know that I have a speech impediment. Like, if you hear me out of breath or you hear me speaking, it's because I actually like at times can't speak, and so like you have to get used to it. And if you don't like it, then I mean, Parker can. I mean, you can stay, but I mean, I think Parker's okay with me saying you can kind of like just like fuck off. But
Literally,
like
you can fuck
it's
off.
part of my
Yeah.
speaking way. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but that's just how I am. So like,
Literally, you could cope.
and I'm sorry, but also not sorry.
You can cope. You know what I mean? Like, seriously. Sarah, thank you so much for the $2. I really appreciate it. Thank you. They said, I freaking love Matt. Absolutely. Sarah, again, thank you for the $5. I really appreciate it. Thank you so
Oh, but
much.
thank you.
Brian, with the $5, really appreciate it. Thank you.